Lillehammer, Norway, July 21st, 1973. Just past 22:30 hours, the midnight sun's lingering twilight casts pale shadows across cobblestone streets as the resort town settles into weekend quiet. Along the main street, couples stroll past shop windows, their conversations mixing Norwegian and the accented English of tourists who had come north for hiking and midnight sun photography, oblivious to the surveillance vehicles parked at intervals along streets leading to apartment complexes 3 blocks from the town center. Inside those rental cars, figures sit with the practiced stillness of professionals conducting close observation, their eyes fixed on a specific building entrance, their hands resting near equipment concealed beneath newspapers and tourist maps. To anyone passing by, they would seem unremarkable, perhaps lost tourists trying to navigate unfamiliar streets or locals waiting for friends, nothing that would warrant attention in a town accustomed to seasonal visitors. But these are not tourists killing time. They are Israeli intelligence operatives conducting final surveillance of an assassination target. Men and women trained in counter-surveillance and the psychological discipline required to maintain cover identities while preparing to execute a killing. Among them is Sylvia Raphael, a South African-born Mossad agent whose operations in Arab capitals and success infiltrating Palestinian organizations had made her one of the agency's most effective combatants. Tonight she watches an apartment where intelligence indicated Ali Hassan Salama, the Red Prince, mastermind behind the Munich massacre that killed 11 Israeli athletes 13 months earlier, had taken refuge in neutral Scandinavia. The surveillance team belonged to Operation Wrath of God, the systematic campaign Prime Minister Golda Meir authorized to eliminate everyone responsible for Munich, a campaign that had already succeeded in Paris, Rome, and Beirut, killing targets who believed European cities offered sanctuary from Israeli retribution. Lillehammer had not witnessed a murder in 36 years, a record reflecting Norway's position outside Middle Eastern violence, a neutrality that made it seem like refuge for those fleeing consequences elsewhere. That record would not survive the night. The operatives in those rental cars were implementing the final phase of an operation that had taken 8 months to plan, required coordination of assets across 3 continents, and represented Israel's ongoing answer to the most traumatic terrorist attack in the nation's 25-year history. 8 months earlier, on September 5, 1972, the world watched in horror as Palestinian terrorists from the Black September organization stormed the Israeli Olympic team's quarters in Munich, Germany. The attack killed 11 Israeli athletes and coaches, transforming what should have been a celebration of international athletic competition into a blood-soaked demonstration that nowhere was safe. That terrorism could strike anywhere at any time with devastating effect. The Munich massacre shocked Israel to its core. The victims were not soldiers or intelligence operatives who had accepted risk as part of their profession, but athletes, swimmers, wrestlers, weightlifters, young men representing their country in peaceful competition. Their deaths felt like a violation not just of Israeli security, but of basic human decency, proof that Palestinian militant organizations would kill anyone, anywhere, to advance their political objectives. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir convened an emergency session of her security cabinet within hours of the massacre's conclusion. The meeting lasted through the night as intelligence chiefs, military commanders, and political leaders debated how Israel should respond. Meir ultimately authorized a comprehensive campaign combining both approaches. The Israeli Air Force would conduct strikes against known Palestinian militant facilities, satisfying public demand for immediate visible response. But the more significant operation would be covert, a systematic campaign to hunt down and eliminate everyone involved in planning, funding, and executing the Munich attack. The operation would be called Wrath of God, and it would become one of the most extensive assassination campaigns in modern intelligence history. Mossad was tasked with identifying targets, tracking their movements, and coordinating execution of eliminations. Anyone who had played a significant role in Munich would be marked for death, regardless of where they lived, how well protected they were, or how long it took to reach them. Intelligence gathering began immediately, and a picture emerged of an operation that had been planned in Beirut, funded through networks connected to Palestine Liberation Organization offices in European capitals, and executed by operatives who had received training in Lebanon and Jordan. One name rose to the top of the target list more prominently than any other: Ali Hassan Salameh, a senior Black September commander responsible for operations planning and coordination. The man Israeli intelligence identified as Munich's architect. He was known as the Red Prince, a nickname that reflected both his affluent lifestyle and his father's legendary status in Palestinian resistance movements, a man who combined operational capability with political sophistication in ways that made him particularly dangerous. For Israeli planners, Salameh represented Black September's operational core. Eliminating him would decapitate the organization's planning capability, demonstrate that no one responsible for Munich would escape consequences, and establish deterrence by showing that Israel could reach high-value targets regardless of their security arrangements or political protection. The campaign began systematically. In October 1972, Mossad agents in Rome tracked Waleswader to his apartment building and shot him repeatedly. In December, agents in Paris planted a bomb in the telephone of Mahmoud Hamshari. In January 1973, agents in Cyprus killed Hussein al-Bashir. By spring 1973, Israeli intelligence had eliminated multiple targets across Europe, each killing executed with precision that minimized collateral damage while sending clear messages about Israeli capabilities and resolve. But Salameh remained elusive. Then, in July 1973, a source informed Mossad that their most wanted target had traveled north to Norway, apparently seeking temporary refuge in Scandinavia's neutral territory. The intelligence indicated Salameh was living quietly in Lillehammer, working undercover. A team was assembled immediately, experienced operatives who had participated in earlier Operation Wrath of God eliminations. Sylvia Raphael was assigned to the team as a key surveillance specialist. Her years of experience operating in hostile environments and her photographic cover making her ideal for the kind of close observation that would be required. Raphael's journey to that surveillance position had begun in circumstances that seemed impossibly distant from covert operations. Graaff-Reinet, South Africa, April 1st, 1937. A small town in the arid Karoo region where families maintain traditions rooted in generations of farming. Sylvia Raphael was born to a father of Jewish descent who had embraced agnosticism and a mother devoted to Calvinist Christianity. She was raised in her mother's religion, attending church services without understanding the Jewish heritage her father had largely abandoned. But when Sylvia was young, a relative visited with stories that would reshape her understanding of her background. The relative had fled Kiev after surviving massacres that killed multiple family members during the Holocaust, arriving in South Africa with memories of violence that seemed incomprehensible. The stories planted something in Sylvia that would grow over years, a connection to Jewish history that her Christian upbringing had not prepared her to process. After completing university studies in 1959, she moved to Tel Aviv to teach English, but the deeper motivation was identity, a need to connect with heritage from which she felt estranged. Her intelligence and fluency in multiple languages attracted attention from a man who introduced himself as Moti Kfir, offering opportunities for more meaningful service than language instruction. He was a commander in Unit 1A8, an elite intelligence unit responsible for special operations outside Israel's borders. The recruitment process was extensive. Psychological evaluations and background investigations examining everything from childhood to motivations. She passed every evaluation, demonstrating capability and passionate commitment to Israeli security rooted in her understanding of Holocaust lessons about costs of vulnerability. Training began in 1964 and lasted 2 years, transforming a language teacher into a professional intelligence operative. She learned map reading, aerial photograph analysis, encoding messages, self-defense techniques, and psychological techniques for maintaining cover identities under sustained pressure. She studied photography with one of Israel's leading press photographers, developing skills that would provide operational cover. By 1966, she had attained the rank of combatant, the highest rank for a Mossad agent, a designation that qualified her to operate independently in foreign countries where discovery would result in diplomatic incidents at minimum and death sentences at maximum. She was assigned cover identity as Patricia Roxborough, a Canadian photojournalist. Her first operational assignment sent her to Paris, where both the Palestine Liberation Organization and Mossad maintained extensive networks. She established herself in the journalism community, taking assignments with photo agencies that provided income and operational cover while conducting surveillance operations against Palestinian targets. Her success in Paris led to assignments in Arab capitals where risks were exponentially higher. She operated in Cairo, Damascus, Beirut, and Amman, cities where Israeli agents faced execution if discovered. She infiltrated Palestinian Liberation Organization circles at levels that required years of careful cultivation, building relationships with PLO officials who believed her to be a sympathetic journalist. She met Yasser Arafat himself, photographing the PLO leader. In Paris, her intelligence gathering led to the successful assassination of Mahmoud Hamshari in December 1972. By the time she was assigned to the Lillehammer operation in July 1973, Sylvia Raphael had established herself as one of Mossad's most effective operatives. The team assembled in Norway during the first week of July 1973, arriving separately through different border crossings. The operational leader was Michael Harari, a Mossad officer whose previous successes had earned him reputation for tactical effectiveness and confidence that sometimes made adjusting to contrary evidence difficult. The intelligence came from a source who reported that Salameh was living in the town undercover as a waiter. The initial challenge was locating Salameh within a town of several thousand residents and summer tourists. Mossad had identified Palestinian courier Kamal Ben-Aman, who traveled between European cities carrying messages for PLO officials. Ben-Amani was tracked from Copenhagen to Oslo, and finally to Lillehammer in mid-July. On July 15th, surveillance teams observed Ben-Amani at Lillehammer's public swimming pool, speaking with a man who matched general descriptions of Salameh: dark-haired, well-built, approximately the right age and height. One of the female Mossad agents jumped into the pool and swam close enough to hear the man speaking with Ben-Aman. He spoke French, a language Salameh was known to speak fluently. Another data point that seemed to confirm identity. Surveillance teams followed. The man to his residence? A modest apartment. The man's behavior was noted carefully. Operatives looking for counter-surveillance awareness. The man never looked back, never paused to examine reflections in shop windows, never took circuitous routes. To experienced operatives, this suggested either exceptional confidence or complete lack of training. The residence was placed under constant observation. Over several days, surveillance teams documented the target's patterns, his work schedule at a public pool, his shopping routines, his evening walks. Photographic evidence was reviewed in Tel Aviv. The resemblance was strong enough to support identification, though photographs taken at distance carried inherent limitations. As surveillance continued, several team members began expressing concerns to operational leadership. The target's behavior did not match expectations for someone of Salame's experience. Raphael herself noted that the man moved through Lillehammer with comfort of someone who belonged there, someone integrated into the community. Marianne Gladnikoff, a Swedish-speaking agent, reported hearing the target speaking Norwegian with fluency suggesting native competence, a language capability that intelligence files on Salame did not indicate he possessed. The concerns were communicated to Harari during operational planning meetings, field agents raising questions about whether the target was actually Salame or someone who resembled him. Harari dismissed the concerns, apparently confident that source intelligence was accurate. The only team member who strongly supported proceeding was Nehemiah Ben-Mir, an agent whose previous success, identifying Adolf Eichmann, earned him reputation for accuracy, confidence that carried weight despite contrary evidence other agents were reporting. The operational dynamics created a situation where command certainty overrode field intelligence. By July 20th, despite doubts that multiple team members had expressed, Harari ordered the assassination to proceed the following evening. At 22:30 hours on July 21st, Buchiki and his pregnant wife Toril left the cinema after watching an evening film, walking through Lillehammer's quiet streets toward their apartment, a route they had taken countless times. The couple walked slowly, Toril's pregnancy making rapid movement uncomfortable. Their conversation quiet as they discussed the film and made plans for the weekend. Ordinary domestic concerns. The surveillance teams had been alerted that the target was returning home. Two operatives emerged from a vehicle parked 50 meters from the apartment building entrance, moving on foot toward the couple with the purposeful stride of men who had conducted this kind of operation before. As Buchiki and Toril came within sight of their apartment building, the two operatives closed the distance rapidly, their hands moving to concealed .22 caliber pistols with suppressors. The first shots struck Buchiki in the torso as he turned toward the approaching men. Additional shots followed in rapid succession, the operatives firing repeatedly to ensure the target would not survive. Buchiki fell to the cobblestones as his pregnant wife stood paralyzed, her mind struggling to process the transformation of an ordinary evening walk into violence. The operatives returned to their vehicle immediately, the entire engagement lasting perhaps 15 seconds. Toril's screams brought residents to windows and doorways. Local police responded within minutes, arriving to find Toril kneeling beside her husband's body, her hands covered in blood. By the time ambulance personnel arrived, Buchiki was dead, his body showing evidence of multiple gunshot wounds. The killing shocked Lillehammer's residents, who gathered trying to understand how murder had come to a town that had not witnessed such violence in 36 years. The following morning, July 22nd, local newspapers reported the killing with details that began to contradict Israeli intelligence assessments. The victim was identified as Ahmed Buchiki, a Moroccan waiter who had lived in Norway for years, who was married to a Norwegian woman now pregnant with their child, who had no connection to Palestinian organizations or Middle Eastern politics beyond the coincidence of his North African origin and his accidental meeting with a Palestinian courier at a public swimming pool where Buchiki worked. The Mossad team read the newspaper reports with growing realization that the operation had killed the wrong man. 9 members of the team, including the actual shooters and operational leader Michael Harari, moved immediately to extract from Norway. By the evening of July 22nd, these operatives were already beyond Norwegian jurisdiction. 6 team members remained in Lillehammer, their extraction plans apparently compromised. The operational failures that allowed 9 team members to escape would not save the remaining 6. On the afternoon of July 22nd, Norwegian police near Oslo's airport noticed 2 individuals in a rental car that matched descriptions circulated. What made the arrest inevitable was amateur operational security that violated basic principles. The two operatives had reused the same rental car with the same license plates that surveillance teams had been operating from in Lillehammer, a catastrophic misjudgment. The two operatives were Dan Arbel and Marianne Gladnikoff. Their interrogations began immediately. Arbel, who suffered from extreme claustrophobia, found himself confined in a small cell that triggered psychological distress severe enough that he became willing to provide information in exchange for transfer to larger accommodations with windows. Norwegian interrogators offered Arbel the exact accommodation he needed in exchange for cooperation. Arbel provided extensive details about the operation, the surveillance conducted on Buchiki, the team's composition, the safe houses Mossad maintained in Lillehammer, and other Norwegian cities. The information led directly to arrest of 4 additional team members over the following 48 hours. Among those arrested was Sylvia Raphael, whose cover as Canadian photojournalist Patricia Roxborough collapsed under interrogation. The other arrested operatives included Abraham Gamer, Gustav Pistauer, and Rolf Baer. A 6th team member, Michael Dorf, was arrested, but would eventually be acquitted. The interrogations exposed Mossad's European infrastructure in ways that would require years to rebuild. Keys discovered on arrested operatives led Norwegian authorities to safe houses. When Norwegian security services shared information with European counterparts, the compromise spread rapidly. French police raided a Mossad safe house in Paris, discovering additional keys and documentation that led to other safe houses across the city. The revelations dealt massive damage to Israeli intelligence capabilities in Europe, forcing recall of agents, abandonment of safe houses, changes to phone numbers and communication protocols. For the first time, clear evidence had been found of Israel's involvement in the string of assassinations that had occurred across European territory as part of Operation Wrath of God. The trial of the arrested operatives became international news. Defense attorneys argued that their clients had played only minor roles. The Norwegian court found 5 of the 6 defendants guilty on charges including planned murder, espionage, and use of forged documents. Michael Dorf was acquitted. The 5 convicted operatives received sentences ranging from 1 year to 5.5 years, with Sylvia Raphael receiving the maximum sentence based on her senior role. For Raphael, imprisonment in Oslo brought unexpected developments. Inside the Norwegian prison, Raphael processed the psychological weight of having participated in an operation that killed an innocent man based on intelligence failures and command decisions that ignored field agents' warnings. She wrote letters expressing disillusionment with Mossad leadership. During trial proceedings, Raphael met the defense attorney the Israeli government had hired, a Norwegian lawyer named Aeneas Schut, whose professional skill and personal character would come to matter far more to her than legal outcomes. During months of trial preparation, a relationship developed between attorney and client that transcended professional boundaries. By the time Raphael was released in May 1975 after serving 15 months, she and Schut had decided to marry. The marriage was formalized after her release, and Raphael chose to remain with Schut rather than return to Israel or accept the offer Mossad extended for her to take an executive position. Raphael declined the Mossad offer, expressing preference for civilian life. The choice represented fundamental break with the identity she had constructed since immigrating to Israel in 1963. She attempted to settle in Norway with Schut, but in 1977 she was deported again. 2 years later, in 1979, she obtained a residence permit that allowed her to return to Norway legally. She lived in Norway with Schut through the 1980s. In 1992, after Schut's retirement, the couple moved to South Africa. It was in South Africa that she learned of Ali Hassan Salama's eventual death. killed in January 1979 by a car bomb in Beirut, the successful elimination of the target that the Lillehammer operation had sought but catastrophically failed to achieve. In February 2005, at age 67, Sylvia Raphael died from cancer in South Africa. Her body cremated according to her wishes. But her journey was not complete, as she had requested that her ashes be transported to Israel for burial at Kibbutz Ramat HaKovesh, the military cemetery where she would find final resting place. The broader consequences of Lillehammer extended far beyond Raphael's personal trajectory. Within days of the arrests in Norway, Prime Minister Golda Meir came under intense international pressure to suspend Operation Wrath of God. Meir ordered the operation suspended in late July 1973, a decision driven by diplomatic necessity. The suspension would last through the remainder of Meir's tenure, though Operation Wrath of God would eventually resume under Prime Minister Menachem Begin. The exposure of Mossad's European infrastructure through the Norwegian arrests required years of rebuilding that Israeli intelligence officials would later describe as among the most costly operational setbacks in the agency's history. Arab governments leveraged the Lillehammer affair extensively in international forums, pointing to the killing of an innocent Moroccan waiter as evidence that Israeli claims about precision targeting were propaganda. The United Nations Security Council passed resolutions condemning Israeli actions. Western governments issued carefully calibrated statements expressing concern, but privately, many intelligence officials acknowledged that Israeli actions represented understandable responses to terrorism, even if execution had been catastrophically flawed. In 1996, after years of refusing to acknowledge responsibility, the Israeli government agreed to pay compensation to Bouchiki's family, offering $283,000 split between his widow Teril and daughter Malika, with separate settlement of $118,000 paid to a son from Bouchiki's previous marriage. The Israeli statement expressed sorrow over Bouchiki's death, but carefully avoided accepting legal responsibility. In 1990, Norway reopened the case, and in 1998 issued a global arrest warrant for Michael Harari, but the case was closed in 1999. For those who participated in Lillehammer, consequences extended beyond geopolitical calculations, manifesting as psychological burdens participants would carry for decades. Dan Arbel, whose claustrophobia had led him to provide extensive information to Norwegian interrogators, would spend his later years working as a supermarket security guard in Tel Aviv. In interviews decades after Lillehammer, Arbel insisted he had warned operational leadership that the target did not match photographic intelligence on Salome, but that Harari had dismissed these concerns. The participants spoke about the pregnant wife's presence at the killing, Teril Bouchiki standing meters away as her husband was shot repeatedly, her screams and the image of her kneeling beside his body becoming memories that several operatives described as haunting them more persistently than other violence they had witnessed. There was something about the complete innocence of the victim that made Lillehammer psychologically different from operations that had killed actual Palestinian operatives. Bouchiki had made no such choices, circumstances that made his death feel less like warfare and more like murder. The operational lessons from Lillehammer became case studies in intelligence training programs worldwide, analyzed as cautionary tales about failure modes that could transform carefully planned operations into catastrophes when command arrogance ignored field intelligence. Raphael's choice to decline Mossad's offer and pursue civilian life was interpreted by some as rejection of the system that had failed at Lillehammer. The unresolved questions about intelligence reliability and command accountability that Lillehammer raised would influence Israeli intelligence practices in subsequent decades, creating more robust systems for verifying target identification. Decades after, Lillehammer remains studied in intelligence training programs as cautionary tale rather than triumph. In 1973, Israeli commandos conducted the Spring of Youth raid in Beirut, eliminating 3 Palestinian officials in coordinated assaults, demonstrating operational audacity at its most effective. Both Beirut and Lillehammer were part of Operation Wrath of God. Both targeted Palestinian leadership. Yet their outcomes could not have been more different, one becoming legend and the other becoming warning about how intelligence failures and command arrogance could transform capabilities into disaster. Raphael became symbol of operational excellence, undermined by leadership failure. A capable agent whose successes across Arab capitals ended because commanders dismissed field agents' concerns about target identification. Her journey from South African childhood to Israeli operative to Norwegian lawyer's wife represented identity transformations that seemed incompatible, yet coexisted in a single life. Buchiki's pregnant wife, Teril, carried trauma of watching her husband murdered on a street where violence seemed impossible. Their daughter, Malika, grew up knowing her father died in mistaken identity. The compensation Israel paid acknowledged harm without accepting responsibility, money that could never restore what had been taken. Whether such operations ultimately served strategic interests or simply demonstrated capabilities without achieving lasting security remained unresolved. Salama was killed in 1979, 6 years after Lillehammer, through methods that also killed bystanders, raising questions about whether eventual success justified accumulated costs. Israeli intelligence continued conducting cross-border operations, but Lillehammer established that failures could expose infrastructure, compromise agents, and create political costs requiring years to overcome. Raphael's choice to be buried at Kibbutz Ramat HaKovesh, despite everything revealed complexity of identity and loyalty, reality that someone could serve an organization with dedication, be failed by its leadership, reject further service, yet still identify with what it represented sufficiently to choose burial among those who served it successfully. The story ends without resolution. Moral complexity never simplified into clear lessons about right and wrong, justified operations, and inexcusable mistakes. What remains is the image of a pregnant Norwegian woman watching her Moroccan husband die on cobblestone street in a small resort town, killed by Israeli operatives hunting a Palestinian terrorist who was not there. Operation authorized at highest levels, responding to terrorism that killed Israeli athletes. All taking place in neutral Norway during 1973, when Cold War dynamics made such covert operations seem necessary and justified to those who planned and executed them, even as consequences suggested that necessity and justification were insufficient guides for operations where intelligence could be wrong, and wrong meant innocent people died for resembling enemies they had never met.